What's up, guys? I'm eHouse, and we haven't had one of these eHouse only reviews in a little while, so I figured I would actually hop on and talk about the KWC 1911s. Now, I know what you're saying. You're like, oh, well, isn't this a, Cybergun Colt licensed M45? It is, but the fact of the matter is, pretty much everything I'm about to say about it goes for pretty much every KWC 1911 on the market. The KWC 1911, if you're not familiar, is it's the base platform for the Elite Force 1911, the Elite Force 1911 TAC, all of the Colt Railgun series from Cybergun, the Red Wolf, Nighthawk series, and I believe even Valken has their own offering from the KWC 1911s. But KWC is the OEM company for all of these. All of them work pretty much exactly the same way, minus one difference that I'll get into, and all of them externally are largely the same, except for a few differences depending on the version of 1911 being replicated. This is the Colt licensed M45, and this is technically not a perfect replication of the Colt M45. It does have the wrong type of railed frame, though that has been updated since I got this. Obviously, this is not the original magazine either. This is actually a Red Wolf magazine. But the guns, like I said, there's a Red Wolf magazine for their Nighthawk series, fits in this Cybergun because they're the same gun. The only difference really functionally between any of these various versions of KWC 1911 is some are regulated down to about 340 to 350 feet per second. This gun gets a green tag at River City, which means it is under 350 feet per second, whereas some of them are not regulated down and they shoot 390 to 400 feet per second in some cases. There are valves that you can install that will bring them down. They do sell those aftermarket, but certain guns will have that from the factory. Cybergun and Elite Force both include the regulator installed in the gun or somehow regulated down to CQB velocities, while Red Wolf and KWC themselves are unregulated and they shoot 390 to 400 feet per second. So those are the two major differences of the different types of KWC 1911 on the market. But other than that, they're mostly the same. On my old channel back in the day, I actually reviewed one of the Elite Force 1911 TACs, and that was a few years ago, and these have been updated since then. Now, the Elite Force 1911 series, Elite Force really did a lot of the research and a lot of the product testing on how to improve this platform of handgun, the KWC 1911. And since I did that review, I picked up this gun. For a little bit, I thought I was going to do a Marsoc-inspired loadout. Then I started building it, remembered why I don't build impression kits, and just ended up building an M81 loadout I liked. So I bought this originally for that, and I've used it a good bit since then. I used this at Fated Giant. I've used this at several local games. And I've got a pretty good feel for it and some of the changes that were made from the older version of Elite Force 1911. And I just figured I would give my kind of in-depth thoughts on some of the newer models of the KWC 1911, because a lot of the videos out there are pretty old at this point and some stuff has changed. So with the KWC 1911s now, you do have more choices of magazines. You have the Red Wolf ones that have the bumpers. You have the traditional KWC magazines that are just the flat base, like the traditional 1911 A1 mags. And then you also have the extended magazines from Elite Force. This magazine holds, I believe, 15 rounds. And then you have the other magazines that are just the base magazines that are 15 rounds as well. And then the extended magazine is, I think, 25 rounds. I don't actually own one anymore. But those are the different magazine options you have. All of them, if you bring it down to the bottom, and then you can hook it up, and that holds the follower in place. Press that and release it. The magazines are really one of the things that KWC are one of the few companies, in my opinion, with this particular model that get the magazines right. The KWC 1911 magazines, they do start leaking eventually. They will wear out, but generally from the factory, they really don't leak, and they will last for a long time. I recommend, everyone has their own opinion on this. I recommend leaving a partially drained CO2 cartridge in here, just because having a little bit of pressure against the valves can kind of help keep them from drying out. Assuming, of course, you put a little drop of silicone oil before refilling the CO2. That's what I do. So put a little drop of silicone oil on the valve before putting the CO2 in and screwing it in place, and you don't have that totally dry air just sitting against the valves. Get just a little bit of silicone on there. Keep a partially full CO2 in there. Basically just shoot the gun. Ooh, you have to shoot your gun. Woe is you. And then keep just a little pressure in there. I do that with my gas magazines as well. I don't empty them out completely because I have found that leads to better life on the valves, is just a little bit of pressure on them. Other than that, yeah, then you have the rebuild kits for the magazines available from Elite Force, which work with all the KWC 1911 mags because they're all the same thing. So you've got the rebuild kits available from Elite Force that all work with all the KWC 1911s. If only any of the other companies were smart enough to offer their rebuild kits, but apparently Elite Force has to do everyone's job for them. So you can rebuild your KWC 1911. Pretty much everything but the slide and frame is available as a rebuild kit. So as long as you have the external parts intact, you can rebuild your gun, which in my opinion makes this one of the best investments as a budget pistol, because they do work pretty well out of the box, and then you can rebuild it, unlike so many other budget pistols. Then the other thing that I find interesting that they've changed is the hop-up is actually a lot better on these than it used to be. The KWC 1911s of old, the old 1911 from Elite Force that I had, I won't mince words, the hop-up was garbage. It sucked. This is a far superior hop-up. I think they refined the tolerances of the hop-up design, or maybe quality control was doing their jobs and I actually got a good one this time. But compared to the other earlier KWC 1911s I've shot, this one has a much, much better hop-up to it. The new hop-up actually makes this gun pretty darn accurate. Now, it's still a handgun, still limited by that, and it's not a Tokyo Marui handgun at that. Now, Tokyo Marui handguns are totally class of their own, but with this hop-up and barrel combination out of the box, you can reasonably expect that with a .25 gram BB, 100-foot shots are going to be within your range, because I was, doing some shooting with this and I was using it on the field. You can definitely get out to 100 feet, maybe a little further, but then you start being limited by, your sight radius, how well you're shooting the gun by yourself. But 100 feet and possibly 120, definitely within the realm of possibility with the new hop-up and the new, just the better quality of the gun, in my opinion. I think they've done a really good job tightening up their quality control. Another change from the old 1911 tacs that I had a problem with was I had a problem where if you pulled the trigger while the gun was on safe, the hammer would drop when you turn the safety off. That, as you can see, no longer happens. That started happening really quickly with my old Elite Force 1911 tac. So the fact that it's not happening with this one, to me, means that they probably reinforced the safety a little bit. That or quality control was doing their job and I got a good one this time. Who knows? That's the thing with all these cheap guns. You never know sometimes. But mine does have a properly functioning safety, unlike the other one I had, which did not. The trigger pull on the newer ones, I feel like is a better trigger overall. I don't recall my old Elite Force 1911 having any kind of audible or tactile reset. And this one, the reset isn't so tactile, but it is audible. And that is very handy. And the trigger pull is pretty relatively short and crisp and really does a good job of replicating that single stack 1911 or single stage 1911 trigger if you know and love that. Unfortunately, you still cannot power stroke the KWC 1911s. That hasn't changed, but the slide release, if you got big hands like mine, easy enough to reach, or you can reach it with your non-dominant hand if you really need to. Not that big a deal. Something that has not changed is that I do think the KWC 1911 has some of the better blowback action on the market. Now, this is a gassed, or at least partially gassed magazine with no BBs in the chamber, and I'm just going to hold down the slide release. It's got a pretty heavy slide to it, and the springs, there's two springs. There's the main recoil spring, and there's the recoil spring around the barrel. So it has a pretty heavy kick to it. And it's not the fastest cycling gun in the world. It's not one of Andre's high kappas, but it will get the job done, especially with that pretty nice trigger. So I actually think that the newer models of this, with the nicer trigger and with the springs, have really nice tension to them, and this one's been pretty durable. And the fact that you can rebuild it at any time with one of the Elite Force kits, this is going to be one of the better cycling budget CO2 guns out there, which I think is part of why the platform is so popular. I mean, I guess there's a reason KWC has gotten so many contracts to OEM for these. You might notice I'm not going in like a ton of detail about the feature set and all the stuff that's on and in this gun. That's because you've probably already watched a million videos on something like the Elite Force 1911 TAC or the Colt Railgun series. The fact of the matter is, I am late to the party if it comes to doing an in-depth, well, if it comes to doing a feature review on one of these guns. So I'm just trying to give you more of an impression of what it feels like from an experience perspective of kind of what's changed and what's different. So I will say that of all the KWC 1911s I've seen and handled, I do think this M45 has my favorite looking finish of the bunch, but none of them have particularly great paint jobs. I mean, if you look here, the G10, well, fake layered G10 grip has a good bit of scuffing on it. The front has all kinds of scratches on it. It's not the most durable finish out there. It's obviously just paint and not a particularly expensive paint, but it's pretty flat and it is pretty close to the real color of the real firearm. So this is probably my favorite finished and probably feature set version of the KWC 1911 personally. And that's the nice thing about the KWC 1911 is you do get, in my opinion, some pretty solid performance for anywhere from 90 to 120 bucks, depending on the version you get. And that's where I think this gun shines. Now, I'm a big fan. I recently built a high kappa. I think that's going to be my primary secondary from now on, but this is still a very solid backup secondary. Or again, if you were ever convinced you were going to do an inspired kit, you got the M45 available. Or if you like Nighthawk guns, you've got the Nighthawk licensed one. Or if you're an Elite Force fanboy, you get an Elite Force 1911 TAC. But I think there is a reason that so many shops report this as being their best-selling pistol, because for the amount of money you're spending, I do think you get a value for your buck. And I was very critical of the old version of the Elite Force 1911 TAC and the old version of the KWC 1911s. But I do think these newer ones, with the improvements to the safety, with the very nice cycle rate, with the improved either quality control or just improved tolerances of the hop up, I do think you're getting a much better gun than you were even back when they came out. So yeah, overall, I mean, for the amount of money you're going to spend on one of these, of $100 to $120 for just a grab and go, ready to play handgun, all you need is some extra mags, which are not that expensive. I think you usually find those for 25 bucks. It's a pretty darn good gun for a beginner. I know a lot of people say, oh, you shouldn't recommend CO2 guns to a beginner, but I don't know. I mean, yes, you have to maintain it properly. Yes, you have to clean it, lube it, and like I said, put a little silicone on the valve before you screw the CO2 in. Yes, all that's true. They do need maintenance, but as long as you maintain the thing properly and as long as you take care of it, I see no reason these new KWC 1911s shouldn't last a practical lifetime of service, because like I said, they've got the rebuild kits from Elite Force available. The magazines are not expensive and you can get them anytime. So if you lose a magazine, get another one from whatever brand is carried at your local shop and any of them will fit. They're relatively durable externally. Like, you can't really break the slide or frame on one of these things short of something extreme like dropping it off a building. And just they're robust. They cycle reliably. They work decently in the cold, unlike many other not 1911s, unlike many other gas pistols in general. Now, there are limits to that, but generally speaking, in that under, 45 to 50 degrees range down to like 25 to 30, these will still work just fine. I've even cycled through a full mag when the weather was like 15 to 20 degrees. But you are still limited because it is a gas blowback mechanism, which is inherently limited by temperature factors. But in terms of the durability and the function and the build and the range and all that other stuff, I do still think this is probably your best budget pistol option, and they do work really, really well. Are they going to be as nice as a Tokyo Marui High Kappa? No. Honestly, in my opinion, nothing is. But when you're looking for something relatively cheap, maybe something for a beginner, or if you're just not a guy who uses his pistol a ton and you just want something robust and reliable, I think it's hard to go wrong with these new KWC 1911s. I think they're a fantastic gun. So anyway, I hope that maybe that helps if you're shopping into one of these and you're curious what someone who's kind of seen the different versions thinks of them. And that's my overall impressions. So, as always, I hope you found this video helpful and entertaining. I'm eHouse from Gun Gamers, signing off.